paid the most per programming language. It's worth noting this can be a bit misrepresentative of what's really happening. So we'll go through them, but then we'll talk in a bit more detail about why these figures might be in the order they're in. So Erlang here is number one. So Erlang's a programming language used to build massively scalable soft real-time systems with requirements on high availability. The short version of that is basically it's used in telecoms, banking, e-commerce, telephony, instant messaging, that kind of thing. So it's a functional language, and it's probably being paid quite well because it's being used by companies that have a very stringent requirement for 100% uptime, or as close to it as you can get. So that's what they mean when they say high availability. If you're a telecom service, you certainly don't want your services to be down. So they're paying people pretty well in exchange for that. Elixir, a dynamic functional language, but Elixir runs on the Erlang VM. So essentially it's just an extension there. So we could kind of bundle those two together, I guess. Closures on here, so that's another functional language. This is a dialect of Lisp. Lisp is a bit further down here. $15,000 discrepancy between those two though, so you're probably better off learning Clojure if you're interested in diving into the world of Lisp. Now interestingly, fourth in the list is Nim. So Nim compiles to C, C++, JavaScript. So Nim is statically typed, which basically means the variables are known at compile time. Unlike something like JavaScript, where you don't actually know what the type is. So even though this is fourth in the list, paying an average salary of $94,000 a year, if we actually go all the way back up to our technologies, programming, scripting, and markup languages, we can see Nim there was at the very bottom at 0.2%. So I think some of the reason that these languages are higher up is just because they're a lot rarer. And so even though this might be the fourth highest paying language on the list, there's probably very few positions available that are requiring specialists in that language. So just because it's high on this list essentially doesn't mean it's a good idea to go for it. In fact, I would say some of the languages much further down this list will probably be a much safer bet in terms of career options. So as we get down to the kind of middle of the list here, we've got Python, C#, TypeScript, SQL, C++. So these ones might be paying less, but there's considerably more market for these kind of positions. So these are a much safer bet and don't require the kind of intense specialism that some of those languages further at the top have. So moving on to the salary changes, so we can see, except for Nim, Erlang, and Apex, all developer salaries actually reported a decrease in median salary from 2023 to 2024. There's probably a variety of reasons for this. So there's obviously political events that happened in 2023. There's an increase in the number of developers. So some reports that I was looking into said there was a up to 15 to 20% increase in the number of developers since 2020 over the past 4 years. There's remote working, which has enabled outsourcing. There's layoffs from some of the larger companies from the back end of kind of a boom there. And it does seem that the junior and the less experienced developers are affected the most here. So it's still pertinent really to develop some kind of specialism. So if you want to be a cybersecurity specialist or a blockchain programmer, you're probably not going to experience the same decreases that some of these have had. We can also see that a lot of the heavy decreases are in front-end kind of languages. If we go down here to, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And the reason, again, as we mentioned earlier, is a lot of those roles are junior developer roles. But even some of the back-end ones like C# and C++ have seen that decrease there. So we'll see what happens next year and see if these come back up again, which I expect they probably will. These are the salaries by developer types. So obviously the senior executive, a vice president of software engineering, for example, you'd expect them to be commanding the highest salaries, which they are there. The developer advocate role that I talked about earlier, so again, those people that are kind of promoting technologies within the developer communities, I was surprised to see them second on this list. They're obviously being paid really well. And we can see that development engineering managers are third on the list here. So the summary does say the highest paid developers of all respondents are site reliability and cloud infrastructure engineers, as both roles are pivotal in keeping digital services up and running. So yeah, again, these are people that are keeping your infrastructure alive. So if you're working on something like a Azure DevOps or a Microsoft Azure environment, they'd be the people looking after the servers and the databases and the virtual networks and that sort of thing, making sure that your applications are actually online. So I agree with that sentiment. You can see why they're being paid a bit more there, such as your cloud infrastructure engineer here. So moving down the list, we can see kind of in the middle of the list here, we have some research kind of roles, academic roles, so research and development roles, scientist, data scientist, or machine learning specialist. And then moving further down the list again, we can see that we have back-end developers here. Again, I don't know why marketing or sales professionals in this list. We can see games developers are quite low on the list, which is probably not a great industry to be in, to be honest, because it's lower on the pay scale because it has a lot of people that want to work in it. There's a very high rate of kind of desirability there, but it's also combined with pretty heavy hours from what I understand. So we can see front-end developers at the bottom of this list, and that's probably because a high percentage of those roles are for junior kind of positions.